Hello and welcome to The Critique. Today we're looking at a script for a narration that explains how LLMs can generate business insights for a professional audience.
It's a great topic, but it's tricky, right? You have to explain something complex and make it practical, but you also have to avoid all that generic AI buzzword territory.
Exactly. So let's just jump straight into the feedback.
Let's do it.
Okay, so first up, the opening of the narration needs to establish a stronger emotional connection with the listener's frustration, this insight gap, before you even introduce the solution.
That makes sense. But looking at the draft, it opens with a pretty standard description of all the data. It lists the tools, the databases. What's actually missing?
The weakness is that it starts a little too abstractly. It just says businesses have lots of data, ERPs, CRMs. It sets a scene, but it doesn't capture that visceral pain point of the interpretation bottleneck.
Ah, that sinking feeling.
Yes, that feeling where analysts are just manual interpreters instead of problem solvers. It's just a bit dry.
I see. So it's stating a condition, we have data, but it's not framing it as a conflict. It's assuming we care about the data volume when what we really care about is the headache that volume is causing.
Precisely. The volume isn't the problem. The silence of the data is the problem.
Right.
So the suggestion is to refine the intro and focus on what the source material calls the paradox of modern analytics.
Okay, so data availability versus usable insight.
Exactly. Frame the abundance of data as the cause of the problem, not just the setting.
But paradox of modern analytics, that still sounds a little high level. How do we make that concrete for the listener? How do we, help them visualize that struggle?
Well, you can use the report versus reality conflict from the material. So instead of just listing data sources, you describe that conflict.
Okay.
Use that specific example. A chart shows declining revenue. That tells you what happened. That's the report.
Right.
But it doesn't tell you if it's pricing issues or supply constraints or seasonality. That's the reality gap.
That's great. Because the chart is technically accurate, but it's practically useless without that context. It's like a doctor telling you your temperature is high, but not if it's a virus or heat stroke.
Exactly. You want the listener nodding their head, thinking, I've been in that meeting. And then you emphasize the delay. By the time someone figures it out manually, the opportunity to act is gone.
I really like that. It shifts the narrative from we have too much stuff to we have the wrong answers. It creates a villain, and the villain is the delay itself.
Yep. Okay, so that brings us to our second point. The script must clearly differentiate an analytics-focused LLM from a standard consumer chatbot.
This feels critical. But just to play devil's advocate here, everyone knows what ChatGPT is. Is it really necessary to define it again? Does that feel, redundant?
It does need it. The weakness here is that the listener might just perceive the LLM as a writer or a generator, a tool for writing emails.
Right.
The idea that it interprets existing data isn't sharp enough. If a CFO thinks this is just going to write poetry about their balance sheet, they're going to tune out immediately.
That's a really common misconception. People hear LLM and they just think creative writing, or worse, hallucination. So how do we break that mental model?
The suggestion is to adopt the reasoning layer terminology from your source material. It helps visualize where the LLM actually sits in the tech stack.
You're changing their mental image.
Yes, from a chatbot to a processor. And to make it concrete, you explicitly state that the LLM sits atop existing BI stacks like Power BI or Tableau. It does not replace them.
So it's not generating new numbers. It's just reading the relationships between the old numbers. Like a super fast reader who's memorized every single report?
Exactly. And use the phrase context engine. Explain that its strength is understanding relationships across all this information at once. Metrics, trends, breakdowns. It's a bridge. The script needs to say, very clearly, it doesn't create data, it interprets it.
That's a powerful reframe. It changes the tool from a creative one to an analytical one. Makes it sound safer, more robust.
Right, so we've defined the tool. Now the draft tries to explain how it works.
And this is where the pacing feels a little off.
Yeah, it does. The explanation of the 6-step insight generation workflow needs to slow way down and put a heavy emphasis on step 4, the context layer.
That's interesting. The draft really does just breeze through the steps. It feels a bit like step 1, data, step 6, profit.
And that's the weakness. The flow from BI layer step 3 to LLM processing at step 5 feels like magic if you gloss over that context layer. The listener has to understand how the LLM knows what the numbers mean.
Right. Otherwise, it seems impossible. And when something seems impossible in a business context, it just seems suspicious.
Exactly. It's the draw the rest of the owl meme. You've got raw data, and then suddenly, insight. What happens in the middle?
So how do we fill that gap?
The suggestion is to clearly distinguish between the standard analytics pipeline, that's collection, prep, BI, and the reasoning transformation. Step 4 is that bridge.
And what specifically goes into that layer? How do we describe that to the listener?
You describe step 3, the BI layer, as finding the trends, the summary tables. That's the what. Then you immediately contrast that with step 4, the context layer. This is where you feed it business definitions, goals, assumptions.
Okay, so a specific example?
Give a specific example. The context layer is what ensures the model understands what churn or margin actually means for this specific business.
Ah, I see. So without that layer, churn is just a word. But with that layer, it's a specific metric with a real business impact. You're teaching the model the dialect of that company.
Exactly. When you explain that the LLM gets the rules of the business alongside the data of the business, the magic just becomes logic. And that's way more persuasive.
That makes total sense. It grounds the technology. It's not AI thinking, it's AI following instructions. Okay, so speaking of reality, the draft then moves on to use cases.
And this is where the rubber really needs to meet the road. The examples need to go beyond just general efficiency claims and show specific problem-solving scenarios.
I did wonder about that. The draft feels a little bit list-like. Sales uses it, finance uses it, operations uses it, everybody wins.
And that's the weakness. It's just a list of departments without showing the mechanism of the insight. It says it helps, but it never says how. It feels like filler.
So the listener doesn't just want to know that it helps sales. They want to know what it found in the sales data. They want to see the detective work.
Yes. And the suggestion is to use that challenge versus LLM application versus result structure to create a little mini narrative for each example.
I love mini narratives. They stick in your brain. So let's take the sales example. How do we turn that from a generic claim into a story?
Okay, so don't just say analyzing trends. Describe the specific finding from the source material. The LLM identified that a revenue drop was driven by fewer repeat purchases, not a lack of new leads.
That is a crucial distinction. One is a marketing problem, the other is a customer success problem.
It is, because that insight completely shifts the strategy toward retention. If you just say it analyzed revenue, you miss all the value. You have to show the pivot.
That's much stronger. What about for marketing?
For marketing, you connect quantitative signals with qualitative sentiment. For example, engagement dropped because a messaging change alienated returning users. It connects the what, the drop, to the why, which is the messaging.
And for operations?
Show how it finds hidden patterns. Reveal that delays aren't systemic, they're isolated to specific shifts or vendors. That allows for targeted fixes, not a huge overhaul.
Right, those are so much better. They show the actual thinking process of the tool. It's identifying the needle in a haystack.
And it proves the concept of the reasoning engine we established earlier. It's diagnosing, not just summarizing. Now, this brings us to the end of the script.
The conclusion. Always the hardest part to land, right? You want to be inspiring, but also grounded.
It is. And the conclusion must balance the benefits of speed and clarity with a stern professional reminder about governance and the technology's limitations.
I did feel the current draft was a bit too sunny. A little bit, buy this now and all your problems are solved.
It is. The weakness is that the ending feels too optimistic, maybe a little salesy if it doesn't address the risks. Hallucinations, misleading explanations. The audience is professional. They know AI isn't perfect. If you ignore the risks, you lose their trust.
You look like you're hiding something.
Exactly. So the suggestion is to ground the strategic benefits, speed, clarity, focus, with the responsible use constraints. Temper the excitement with responsibility.
So how do you script that without ending on a total downer? You don't want to scare them away.
You use the human-in-the-loop concept. So, for example, you reiterate the no single source of truth rule. You have to say out loud that LLMs can hallucinate if the data is incomplete. You just have to acknowledge the elephant in the room.
That actually builds confidence, doesn't it? Admitting the flaw makes the claim stronger. It shows you know what you're doing.
Precisely. And then you emphasize the human role. The goal isn't automation for its own sake. LLMs support thinking. They do not replace human judgment.
That's a great line. Support thinking, not replace judgment. That also appeals to the ego of the analyst. They're being augmented, not replaced.
And finally, you conclude with that thought from the source material. LLMs do not replace analytics. They complete it. It solves the last-mile problem of analytics. It frames the tech as the final piece of the puzzle, not a replacement for the whole board.
That's a powerful ending. It validates the work that analysts are already doing, but gives them a way to finally finish the job. It feels evolutionary, not revolutionary, which is much easier to sell.
So, to recap the main points, start with the interpretation bottleneck to create that emotional urgency. Define the LLM as a reasoning layer to separate it from chatbots. Emphasize the context layer to explain the magic. Use specific challenge result examples, and end with human governance to maintain credibility.
I really think these changes will transform the script from just a tech explainer into a persuasive business argument. It takes the listener on a journey from frustration to clarity.
I agree. So, to our listener, we invite you to refine the script with this feedback and submit the next draft for a final polish. We'd love to see how you implement these ideas.
Can't wait to hear the next version.
That's all for this critique. Now get back to writing.